You know, when you look back at American history, some years just jump out. They're these turning points, absolutely packed with so much conflict and change that they feel like they're holding the entire future in their hands. Well, 1906 was one of those years. It was a time of just incredible ambition and at the same time, devastating failure. It was a year defined by this startling, deeply uncomfortable paradox that we're going to unpack together.
I mean, the whole period was called the Progressive Era, right? It was supposed to be all about reform and moving forward, but that brings up a really big question. One that was haunting every single major event of 1906. What does progress actually mean? And maybe more importantly, who is it really for? For a lot of Americans, progress was something you could actually see and feel. It was the federal government finally stepping in and saying, hey, that medicine in your cabinet shouldn't be poison, and the food on your table should be safe to eat. It was about preserving these incredible, majestic, natural wonders for, all of us, for every generation to come.
But, and this is a huge but, for millions of other Americans, progress felt like a cruel joke. In that exact same year, progress meant watching your business get burned to the ground. It meant being hunted in the streets of your own city. And it meant the highest court in the land basically saying the federal government had zero obligation to protect your simple right to earn a living.
Okay, so let's start with the promise, with the progress part of the story. In 1906, you've got President Theodore Roosevelt in charge, and the federal government starts flexing its muscles in ways it just never had before. It was on this mission to create national standards, to bring some kind of order to the absolute chaos of a rapidly industrializing America.
Now, this law didn't just appear out of nowhere, right? It was a direct result of total public fury, which was ignited by these muckraking journalists like Upton Sinclair. His book, The Jungle. Wow. It exposed the disgusting, horrifying conditions in Chicago's meatpacking industry. And for the first time, Washington took direct responsibility for the safety of what we all eat and drink. And the government's new reach, it went way beyond the dinner table. It stretched out to the landscape itself. The Antiquities Act was a huge piece of Roosevelt's conservation agenda. On September 24th, he used this new power to make Devil's Tower in Wyoming the very first national monument. It basically created the whole framework for protecting America's shared heritage.
And this push to standardize things wasn't just about food or land. It was about the very idea of what it meant to be an American. See, before 1906, becoming a citizen was this messy, state-by-state free-for-all. The Naturalization Act created one single, federally managed system, and yeah, it came with an English language requirement, all in an effort to create a more unified national identity.
But just as Washington was trying to engineer this new, orderly nation, Mother Nature delivered a devastating reminder of just how chaotic life can be. In April of 1906, a massive earthquake slammed the West Coast, putting this whole vision of a competent, organized America to its most severe test yet.
The scale of the devastation. It's just almost impossible to wrap your head around. The quake itself was catastrophic, sure, but the fires that came after were even worse. They burned for 3 days, and in the end, they killed more than 3,000 people and wiped out 80% of San Francisco.
And get this number. Out of a city of about 410,000 people, more than half of them, 225,000 people, were suddenly homeless. Just like that. It was one of the worst humanitarian crises in American history. It turned the jewel of the West Coast into this sprawling landscape of refugee camps.
And the response really showed this fascinating tension. On one side, you had the U.S. Army, a federal force, stepping in with a pretty organized effort, handing out aid, providing medical care, setting up shelters. But on the other side, you had the local civilian leadership responding with just brute force, issuing this shocking shoot-to-kill order against looters. It really revealed these deep fears about society just completely breaking down.
But while San Francisco was rebuilding from a natural disaster, another American city was busy tearing itself apart. The events that unfolded in Atlanta in September 1906, they show us the dark, violent underside of the Progressive Era, a time that historians also call the nadir of American race relations for a reason.
For 3 straight days, Atlanta was just consumed by this horrifying wave of racial violence. It kicked off with sensational, totally unproven newspaper headlines. And within hours, a mob of thousands of white men was just roaming the city, pulling black people off of streetcars, attacking them in the streets. The violence got so bad that even when the National Guard showed up, some police officers were accused of actually joining in with the rioters.
And you have to understand, this didn't just come out of nowhere. This massacre was the result of this toxic mix of things all boiling over at once. You had politicians running for governor on explicitly racist platforms. You had a deep economic resentment simmering against the successful black business community.
And you had popular culture, like a hit play called The Klansman, that openly glorified the Ku Klux Klan.
So the official death toll they reported was at least 25 black Americans. But as this chart shows, a lot of historians and even people at the time believed the real number was much, much higher, maybe as many as 100. It really suggests that the full scale of this atrocity was probably covered up on purpose.
This quote, man, it's so raw, so powerful. It's from W.E.B. Du Bois, a leading scholar who was teaching in Atlanta when this all went down. It just perfectly captures the profound shift that happened. For so many in the black community, the massacre was a brutal, painful lesson. If the law won't protect you, you're gonna have to protect yourself.
Which brings up a huge question. Where was that expanding, progressive federal government in all of this? Well, the answer didn't come from the White House. It came from the Supreme Court, which in that very same year delivered a verdict that legally sanctioned this total abandonment.
The case was called Hodges v. United States, and at its heart was a simple but profound question. Could the federal government use the 13th Amendment, the one that ended slavery, to protect black workers from being terrorized by white mobs who didn't want them to have jobs? The court's answer was a resounding, devastating no. With this ruling, the Supreme Court declared that the federal government had no power to step in. It was an explicit judicial retreat. The nation's highest court officially said that black citizens were on their own, left to the mercy of the very state and local forces that were often part of the violence against them.
So when we pull back and look at 1906, what we see is a nation forging two completely different paths at the exact same time. It was cementing this dual legacy that would really define the struggles of the entire 20th century.
Think about it. On one path, you have a government creating national standards for goods, but not for justice. It was building the legal foundation for a modern regulatory state, while at the same time giving the legal justification for abandoning its black citizens. The very same year that laid the groundwork for things like the FDA also served as this painful catalyst for the civil rights movement, born from this profound sense of betrayal. And all of this leaves us with a question that is just as relevant today as it was back in 1906. When a nation decides to expand its power, when it creates new standards for the public good, how does it define the public? And who, at the end of the day, does it choose to protect?